Good morning, friends. Welcome to the Immanuel 10 at 10. We had a really wild day yesterday. We had kind of bookends of the day with storms early in the morning and then late at night. Uh, it was just crazy. Apparently, we're going to possibly have some more later on today, too. Um, it certainly is slowing things down for the farmers with the harvest and the construction out here on Broad Street. That's come to a standstill, but thankfully, both the construction and the harvest are well underway, and they've got a good start already. Well, in our Bible reading plan right now, we are beginning the New Testament. So we're looking at the four Gospels um, in chronological order. And the Gospels, the word in Greek is evangelion, which is where we get the word evangelical, which is part of the full name of our church, Immanuel Evangelical Norwegian Lutheran Church, is what the original full name. Uh, the word gospel is really all about good news. It's the good news about Jesus and the kingdom of God that he came to proclaim. So, really, the gospel was a message long before it was a book. And we have four of them: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's wonderful that we have those four different perspectives. Each of them were written by careful writers who were using 30 to 40 years of oral tradition from eyewitnesses, people who had memorized Jesus's sayings and who had seen what Jesus had done. And every one of the writers has a slightly different perspective and particular things that they wanted to emphasize about Jesus and his message. Um, the Gospel of Matthew was perhaps put first in the New Testament because his Gospel emphasizes the connection between Jesus and the Old Testament. All the way through Matthew, there are all these different Old Testament quotations. If you have a study Bible, it probably will tell you where all those quotations are from. It's helpful to look them up and see where they're coming from, what's going on in that part of the Old Testament. So Jesus is really the continuation and the fulfillment of God's promises in the Old Testament. Uh, Matthew begins with a genealogy, tracing Jesus's line from Abraham all the way up to David, and then all the way up to Jesus. Uh, yeah, well, and even yeah, so from Abraham to David, from David to the exile in Babylon, and from the exile in Babylon to Jesus. Each one of those is 12 generations. He's very specifically chosen some, particular ancestors to highlight so that it would be 12, 12, 12, 12. And we think the reason for that is in Hebrew, the word David, uh, they don't use vowels, they just have the consonants. And if you assign a number to each of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, D, V, D equals, when you add those numbers together, they equal 12. So it's like the whole list is shouting, David, 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 that Jesus is the Messiah from David's line. You've got your king back, he's saying. Matthew also goes to great lengths to talk about how Jesus is like a new, better Moses. He brought the people out from slavery. Jesus brings us out of slavery to sin. Moses brought the people through the Red Sea, and Jesus um, was baptized in the Jordan River to associate himself with us. Uh, Moses led the people through the wilderness for 40 years, and Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness at the beginning of his ministry. Um, Moses received the law from the mountain, and Jesus went up on the mountain and gave his Sermon on the Mount, where he was giving the law himself. So that's all the way through, chapters 1 through 3. And then in chapters 4 through 7, Jesus announces God's kingdom. and he begins this new rescue operation for the world. He gives that Sermon on the Mount, which describes God's upside down kingdom, and he begins confronting evil, restoring God's reign, and creating a new family. Then in chapters 8 through 10 of Matthew, Jesus starts bringing God's kingdom into people's lives. He's healing people, he's casting out demons, he's announcing good news, and making it come into people's lives. Because he's here to transform our hearts and our world. And he calls us to follow him. That's to be our response. Matthew points out all the way through how Jesus fulfills God's promises spoken through the prophets. He was born in Bethlehem, which was David's hometown. He was visited by wise men from the east, just like the prophets promised that the nations would come to his rising. And he was born to a virgin, as Isaiah promised. That part of Isaiah, where Isaiah 7, where he promises this sign, he will be the sign of Immanuel, the name of our church, which it simply means God with us in Hebrew. Jesus is God's presence, put on flesh and bone, become one of us, to bring the good news of God's kingdom right into our midst. In chapter 10 of Matthew, Jesus sends out the 12 to go out and do the very things that he is doing, healing, casting out demons, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. And he tells his disciples to expect some people to accept the message and other people to reject it. And then in chapters 11 through 13, we see all of those things. Um, People have all these different reactions to Jesus. Some people are positive. They say, he is the Messiah. Some people are a little more neutral, like John the Baptist and even Jesus' own family. They're kind of like, is he the Messiah? And some, especially the religious leaders, are very negative. They say, he is not the Messiah. So then in chapter 13, Jesus teaches the people with parables, these surprising stories that point out what God's surprising kingdom is like. In the list of in the description of this video, I've got a link to the Bible Project study on Matthew. It's the first of two videos on Matthew, just goes up through chapter 13. And it shows how this gospel is beautifully crafted to highlight particular truths about Jesus. We'll watch another video on Matthew in a few weeks that will walk through the rest of the story as we read it. Today's study focuses on Jesus' baptism. It's this picture of being rescued through the waters of death to enter new creation life. And the story of Jesus' baptism connects to all sorts of stories in the Old Testament. When you think about it, Jesus is baptized by John in the Jordan River, right where Joshua led the people through the waters. They opened up so that they could enter the promised land. And that connects to the story of Moses, where he led the people through the Red Sea and the waters opened up for them. It brought them out from slavery and saved them from death. That connects to the story of Noah's Ark, where God used the waters, to condemn and start fresh with kind of a new start, and saved Noah and his family. And that goes all the way back to the story of Genesis, where God created the world, and at first everything was uh, just a watery chaos, and God brought order and life out of that chaos. So Jesus is like Joshua, leading us into the promised land. He's like Moses, leading us out from slavery to sin and freeing us from the power of death. He it is the new creation, like Noah and the very beginning of the Bible point to. All of these things come together in the Gospel of Matthew to tell us who Jesus is and what he's doing, the kingdom that he is bringing. Well, our adult class this Sunday meets during Sunday school at 8:30 in the Cornerstone room. We're going to be looking specifically at this Gospel of Matthew and discussing it together. And worship is at 9:30. So have a great weekend. See you soon.